In 1987, police entered Ronald Gene Simmons' rural Arkansas home and found a scene so horrific that even the most seasoned investigators were shocked. Inside, the bodies of 14 people lay strewn about, his family, his flesh, and his blood. But the horror didn't end there. What followed would become one of the most shocking massacres in American history. To the public, Ronald Gene Simmons was already known for being cold, reclusive, even strange, but no one was prepared for what was uncovered inside that house. Not the twisted motives, not the years of terror that preceded it, and certainly not the secrets that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. Simmons didn't just kill. He built a life around control, cruelty, and domination. This is not an easy story. It's one of incest, emotional torture, and murder. If those themes are too heavy for you, this might not be the case to follow. But if you're still here, know this. Once you hear what really happened behind the walls of that Arkansas home, it will stay with you. Because monsters aren't just made in stories. Sometimes they wear uniforms. Sometimes they're fathers. Witnesses later described Simmons with words like mad dog, weirdo, and friendly, conflicting glimpses into a man who kept most of his true self hidden. One woman recalled, "He pointed a gun at me. He smiled. Not like a person smiles, like a predator, like something wild." Simmons showed no emotion, no remorse, only a chilling silence that would terrify even the most hardened detective. But let's go back, long before the blood, before the headlines. Ronald Gene Simmons was born July 15, 1940, in Chicago, Illinois, during a time of war and great uncertainty. He was just a toddler when tragedy struck. His father died of a sudden stroke, leaving a void that would never quite be filled. A year later, his mother remarried a man in the Army Corps of Engineers, and Ronald's life was thrown into constant motion. The family never stayed in one place for long. Moving from base to base across Arkansas, Ronald was always the outsider, the new kid, never able to put down roots or form lasting friendships. Over time, that loneliness turned to bitterness. He became angry, withdrawn, and combative. By his teens, he was already feared by classmates and a problem for teachers. He didn't fit in, and eventually he stopped trying. Home wasn't any better. Simmons clashed with his stepfather, and by 16, his behavior was spiraling out of control. In a desperate attempt to impose structure, his parents enrolled him in military school. Strangely, it worked. Simmons responded not to love or support, but to control. Rules made him feel powerful. For the first time, he had a taste of discipline, and he liked it. After graduating in 1957, the military felt like the only path forward. He enlisted in the Navy and was stationed in Washington State. That's where he met Rebecca "Becky" Ulibari. To Ronald, she may have represented the stability he never had, or maybe she was just another thing he wanted to possess. Whatever the reason, the relationship moved fast. They married in 1960 and soon after started a large family. From the outside, Ronald and Becky looked like any other military couple, young, married, and raising children. But behind closed doors, Ronald was anything but ordinary. Over the years, he became increasingly rigid, demanding perfection from his wife and children. He wasn't just controlling, he was obsessive. The house had to be spotless. Becky's appearance had to be exactly how he wanted it. There was no room for error. As his military career advanced, so did his need to dominate. Ronald left the Navy in 1963 and joined the Air Force shortly after. He was decorated and praised, awarded for his service, his discipline, his marksmanship. But no medal could cover up what was happening at home. What started as emotional abuse soon escalated into physical punishment, and eventually, something even more disturbing. One of Simmons' daughters, Sheila, began to receive special treatment. At first, it seemed like simple favoritism. She had more freedom, more privileges. But soon, it became clear this was something darker, too close, too intense. And then came the moment that shattered what was left of the family. Ronald gathered everyone in a room, looked them in the eyes, and announced that Sheila was pregnant, and he was the father. He said it coldly, without shame or hesitation. He expected everyone to accept it, to carry on as if incest was just another part of their household. Becky, broken and emotionally destroyed, said nothing. But Ronald Jr., Sheila's older brother, couldn't stay silent. He went to her school and told a counselor everything. At first, Sheila denied it, but eventually she broke. Through tears and shame, she told the truth. And here's where the story becomes even more terrifying. Ronald Simmons wasn't just an abusive father. He was a decorated war veteran, a man with medals, rank, and respect. He wore the uniform of a hero while building a kingdom of fear at home. In 1981, the Department of Human Services launched an official investigation. But instead of facing justice, Simmons ran. Like so many cowards, he chose to disappear. He moved his family to Ward, Arkansas, and got a job as a clerk at a veterans hospital. For a while, he seemed to disappear into the background. But the abuse didn't stop. It got worse. Sheila became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was terminated, but the damage was already done. Becky was done too, emotionally numb, unwilling to share a bed with him. And yet they stayed, all of them, under one roof. In 1983, the family bought a 14-acre property in Pope County. They called it Mockingbird Hill, a name that would become infamous. Isolated, wrapped in barbed wire, with a no trespassing sign hammered into the ground, it became Simmons' fortress. A mobile home turned prison, a compound hidden from society. Inside, his rules reigned supreme. No warmth, no compassion, just control. Sheila, desperate for something normal, began seeing a young man named Dennis. Despite the long distance, Dennis drove hours just to be with her. But Simmons couldn't tolerate it. He wanted total control, and this relationship threatened that. And so, the seeds of his final plan began to take root. In Simmons's twisted mind, there was only one way to restore order, one way to regain complete power. By December 1987, something inside him snapped completely. He had lost his grip on the family, on Sheila, on the life he had so carefully controlled. And so, on December 22nd, he began a killing spree that would horrify the world. One by one, he murdered his family members, his wife, his children, even the grandchildren, calmly, methodically, almost like it was nothing. But it wasn't over. Simmons left the house and drove to a former workplace where he continued the massacre. By the time he was arrested, 16 people were dead, and Ronald Gene Simmons showed no remorse, no emotion. Only that same cold, hollow stare that haunted everyone who had ever crossed his path. This wasn't just a case of murder. It was a case of domination, of obsession taken to the most horrific extreme. A man who built his life around control and destroyed everyone who threatened to take it away. There was a phone on the property, but Ronald refused to let anyone hook it up. No calls in, no calls out. He demanded complete isolation. The plumbing was non-existent. No working bathrooms inside, just 2 outhouses outside. To make matters even weirder, Ronald built a towering makeshift fence around the house, some sections reaching 10 feet high. He wanted control of everything, including what could be seen, heard, or communicated. Just before Christmas, he ordered the family to dig a new privy pit in the yard. They didn't question him. After all, he was in charge. But that pit would become a grave for secrets far darker than they could ever imagine. Meanwhile, William, one of his sons, was trying to rebuild his life with his wife, Wilma. Their plan: temporary stay at Mockingbird Hill, then a fresh start and remarriage in February 1988. William arrived at the farm on December 21st, but Wilma stayed behind in New Mexico due to money troubles. Back at the property, Ronald was sinking deeper into himself. He locked himself in his bedroom, a private chamber no one, not even Becky, was allowed to enter. His sister-in-law would describe him later as quiet, stingy, and dead-eyed, a man whose glare could freeze anyone in their tracks. Even the children were terrified of him. He forced them to haul 5-gallon buckets of dirt up steep hills, pointless punishment under his twisted orders. Loretta, his 17-year-old daughter, once told a classmate her father was a drunken bum, always clutching a beer and retreating into that foul-smelling locked room. It was clear their home had become a prison. Ronald had once been a decorated military man. Navy, then Air Force, medals, discipline, order. But after discharge, civilian life bruised his ego. He took lowly jobs until he landed in a local legal office as a clerk. For a moment, Ronald seemed to have control again, until he made unwanted sexual advances toward a female co-worker. He was fired and recast himself as the victim in his deluded mind. He then worked for Woodline Motor Freight and tried to restrain his behavior, but resentment fermented inside him. To Ronald, women were objects, soldiers were respectable, civilians were nothing. Quando Joyce Elaine Butts, a new female boss, outranked him, his rage boiled. He became insubordinate and was fired again. In his mind, women everywhere were conspiring against him. As the years passed, his children grew up and began moving away. The younger ones, Eddie, Marianne, Becky, had little choice but to stay. But the fractures in the family were deepening. Sheila had survived unspeakable trauma and married young. William Jr. and his wife built a new life in Fort Smith. Loretta, a brilliant student, dreamed only of escape. They were all counting down the days. Meanwhile, Christmas 1987 approached with a false hope. Becky sent out greeting cards filled with excitement, looking forward to a full family reunion. Ronald, however, had much darker plans. He instructed the children to dig that new pit. They assumed for an outhouse. Instead, they were digging the foundation for a mass grave. On December 22nd, the nightmare began. The house was silent when Ronald Gene Simmons Jr. returned, the same son who had reported the incest years earlier. Ronald struck him in the forehead with a crowbar, again and again. He finished with a stomp to ensure Gene was dead. It wasn't a fury, it was calculated revenge. Becky heard the sounds and rushed upstairs, only to be struck herself. Ronald crept up behind her, swinging the crowbar across her shoulders, mercilessly tearing flesh from bone. Her final moments were agonizing. He finished her off with a .22 caliber bullet to the back of the head. All this while their young granddaughter Barbara sat alone in the next room. Barbara's sobs woke Ronald, who entered her room pretending to console her. Instead, he strangled her to death, dumped her body in a garbage bag by her grandmother's. He wrapped barbed wire around the pit and soaked the bodies in kerosene to mask the stench, cold and methodical, like a ritual. Next came Loretta, dragged into the living room and forced face first into a barrel of cold water, suffocating her life away. Eddie, Marianne, Becky Jr., all thrown into the pit and buried like discarded trash. No mercy, no remorse. Oh, then William Sr., his wife Renata May, and their toddler William III. Shot and strangled in their home, their bodies arranged at the dining table, covered in coats. Their baby son's corpse placed in the trunk of a car parked behind the house, another haunting detail in a meticulously controlled massacre. Later that day, Sheila, Dennis McNelt, and their children Sylvia and Michael arrived, unaware. They stepped inside and froze at the macabre tableau. What followed was chilling. Sheila and Dennis were shot. Michael strangled. Sylvia too. Bodies arranged in rows inside the lounge. Sheila draped in a tablecloth. Dennis's son left in a muddy patch. Ronald's final act of depravity. After the massacre, Ronald drove to Sears and picked up Christmas gifts he'd ordered for the family. Then he headed to a private club to drink, unwind, celebrate what he believed was a flawless plan. That night, he returned home, drank beer, and watched TV like nothing had happened, his calmness as disturbing as the murders themselves. On December 28th, he went on another killing spree. At Walmart, he bought a gun. Then he stormed into the law firm of Kathy Kendrick, the woman who fired him. She was shot dead. Next, he attacked Taylor Oil, killing James Chaffin and wounding others. Finally, he went to Woodline Motor Freight and shot his former supervisor, Joyce Butts, and worker Vicky Jackson, taking her hostage to call the police. When law enforcement arrived, they discovered a grisly scene. 16 dead. Michigan authorities rushed in. Ronald was found calm. He was found sane. He had no remorse. His wife, Becky, had been saving money and planning an escape, and his own children had been helping her. One letter Becky wrote referred to herself as a prisoner. "Dad has had me like a prisoner." Loretta's friends confirmed the horror everyone sensed. She wanted out. There had been signs. A letter from Ronald to Sheila said, "I will see you in hell." When prosecutors introduced it in court, Ronald reacted violently. He punched an officer, lunged for a deputy's gun. It was a final display of rage and control slipping away. In May 1988, Ronald was convicted of the murders of Kathy Kendrick and James Chaffin and sentenced to death by lethal injection, plus 147 years. He refused to appeal. "I want no action by anybody, absolutely no appeal," he told the court. In February 1989, he was convicted of the family massacre and again sentenced to death. Even the Supreme Court got involved. His case reached nationwide attention in Whitmore v. Arkansas, but the court refused another appeal. His execution was scheduled for June 25, 1990, the fastest execution since 1976. His final words, "Justice delayed finally be done is justifiable homicide." He left no visitors, no remorse, no family claimed his body. He was buried in a pauper's plot. For us, the investigators, the storytellers, this case hits differently. It's not just the number of victims, it's how methodical, cold, and utterly calculated it was. A man who weaponized his own family and celebrated his plan as if it were a victory. This leaves us with troubling questions. Were there signs that were missed? Could someone have intervened earlier? What broke this man so profoundly? At its core, this wasn't just mass murder. It was a manifesto of control, dominance, and obsessive power. If you've made it this far, thanks for listening. Let us know in the comments. Do you think this horror could have been avoided? Would you have spoken up if you'd seen the warning signs? And if you want more insights like this, check out the next suggested video on the screen. Thanks again for watching Into the Crime Depths. Please subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. See you on the next spooky journey.